seems like everyone just forgot about the fact that the Pentagon confirmed to have real footage of a UFO, and the CIA has released thousands of UFO documents online. Like, why isn't this being talked about more? Aliens could very well be real. Today, let's look at some of the most famous real UFO sightings out there. Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm your host, Lindsay Ivan, but before I begin, let me know in the comments below if you've ever seen a UFO, and hit that like button if you believe in aliens. Now, let's get on with the video. Starting off this countdown, we have the Pentagon footage.
There's a whole fleet of them, look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
So in April of last year, the Pentagon released footage of what they said was an unidentified flying object. These videos were recorded back in 2004 and 2015, and now they finally released the footage. They claim it's now safe to do so. So in the videos you can see what appears to be a UFO flying in the sky. This was captured by some naval aviators, and in the video you can hear the pilots are in shock at what they're seeing. In fact, one of the pilots that witnessed this told CNN that the disc moved in ways that he couldn't explain. Apparently, 1 second it was there, and then the next thing he knew, it disappeared. He said, and I quote, "As I got close to it, it rapidly accelerated to the south and then disappeared in less than 2 seconds. This was extremely abrupt, like a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall." Pretty creepy if you ask me. But yeah, the Pentagon and the US government have verified that this footage is of a UFO. Moving on to number 9, we have the O'Hare airport saucer. And if you guys are liking this video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. On November 6th of 2006, 12 employees at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago witnessed a saucer-shaped craft outside of the airport. Several other people outside of the airport saw this as well. It occurred at around 4:15 p.m. that day. Witnesses say that the UFO just hovered in the sky for about 5 minutes before shooting upwards. When it did this, it created a big hole in the clouds. Airport employees claim that this was no way an airplane. The object was dark gray in color and 6 to 24 feet in diameter. Some say it looked like a frisbee was spinning in the sky. Others claim it wasn't rotating, just hovering. What's even weirder is how quiet the object was. Again, to this day, no one knows what on earth it is that they saw. Probably because it wasn't from Earth. Moving on to number 8, we have the Canadian UFOs. So apparently, Canada is home to tons of UFOs. According to an official report, people see UFOs in the sky at least 3 times a day. The sightings last about 15 minutes each. There are about 1,000 UFO reports filed in Canada every year. In 2017, most sightings were in Quebec with 518 sightings, then Ontario with 241, and then BC with 128. Some people even witness unusual flashing lights when they see this strange object in the sky. Now, some of these sightings have been debunked. Some were just an airplane, others were meteors from space, so on and so on. But there are still a high number of sightings that have been confirmed as real UFOs. In our 7th spot, we have Falcon Lake. This has to be one of Canada's most famous UFO encounters. So on May 20th, 1967, apparently 2 glowing objects descended from the sky near Falcon Lake in Manitoba. This was witnessed by a man named Stephen McCallick. Apparently one of these weird crafts landed close to him. He decided to go investigate when it suddenly shot back into the sky. The beam of light from the craft as it took off set Stephen's clothes on fire. He was left with a bunch of strange burns on his body. Following this encounter, he fell ill. Additionally, he was left with burn marks on his chest in a pattern of dots. As a result of this UFO encounter, the Canadian Mint released a special glow-in-the-dark Stephen-inspired coin in 2018. Now, why would they do this if they thought the story was just one big hoax, or if they thought he was just an attention grabber? Just saying, just saying. Moving on to number 6, we have the astronauts. Okay, so you might not believe the claims that random strangers have made about UFOs, but would you believe credible astronauts? Well, astronaut Buzz Aldrin himself has witnessed a UFO while he was on board Apollo 11. So here's the thing, there was this huge hoax going around for a while claiming that Aldrin said he saw aliens while in space. That part is false. He didn't see aliens, he saw an unidentified object floating outside the window of the Apollo 11 spacecraft. At first he thought it was part of the detached rocket. That was until Mission Control confirmed that it was 6,000 miles away. Now he's not the only astronaut to believe in UFOs though. Astronauts Edgar Mitchell and Catherine Coleman and a scientist Dr. Brian O'Leary believe that the government is hiding information from them about aliens. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Project Blue Book. In June of 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold was out flying his plane when he saw 9 strange objects moving at high speeds through the skies near Washington's Mount Rainier. They were flying in a V formation and were glowing a bright bluish-whitish light. After his claims became public, a number of other people witnessed similar things. As a result of the number of rising claims, the US Air Force started investigating these UFO sightings. This gave birth to Operation Sign in 1948 and then Project Blue Book in 1952. Over the years they gathered evidence on more than 12,000 sightings. In fact, this project is considered the longest running of the US government's official inquiries into UFO sightings. In the end, 90% of the cases were identified. So they were either like an airplane going by or a weather blimp or some sort of astronomical phenomenon. But that 10%, 700 cases, they were listed as unidentified flying objects. Coming in at number 4 we have Shag Harbor. On October 4th, 1967, a number of people in the small fishing village of Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, reported seeing weird orange lights in the sky. Apparently, there were 4 lights that flashed on and off before crashing into the harbor. They then saw that weird, large, glowing object sink down into the water. The RCMP responded to the reports thinking maybe a plane had crashed. But not only were no planes missing, but the seafloor was empty. In fact, RCMP Constable Ron Pond witnessed the lights himself. He claims he saw the 4 lights attached to a flying 60-foot-long craft. Ron followed the craft and saw it moving on the water, leaving behind a yellowish foam. As a result, this was confirmed to be a real UFO sighting. In our 3rd spot we have Rendlesham Forest Incident. In December of 1980 in Rendlesham Forest, England, a number of people reported seeing unexplained lights and then a weird spacecraft land. In fact, a number of US Air Force officials were witnesses to this account, including Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt. The lieutenant himself confirmed it to be a UFO. To this day, this is the most famous UFO event to happen in the UK. Moving on to number 2, we have the WESTALL UFO. On April 6 of 1966 in Melbourne, Australia, a weird UFO was seen flying in the air. This was seen by more than 200 students and teachers at a nearby school. It happened at around 11 AM that day. The students and teachers were outside playing sports when they saw this saucer-type object in the sky. It scared a lot of the students and stunned the teachers. They described it as being a silver, shiny aircraft with a purple hue to it. Others say it was more green in color. But it was twice the size of a family car. On top of that, some say they saw 1 disc, while others say they saw 3. This incident was explored by the Victorian Flying Saucer Research Society and Phenomena Research Australia, but they haven't been able to rationalize it. To this day, it is considered one of Australia's major unexplained UFO cases. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Berkshire UFO. Imagine witnessing a UFO fly by in the sky, and later find yourself on a mysterious craft. Believe it or not, but this is what happened to a number of people in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. On September 1st, 1969, a number of unrelated people claimed to have seen a bunch of strange lights. Some people even claimed that they were abducted by this bright light. Or randomly time passed and they don't know what happened for the hours lost. One of the people that witnessed this was Melanie Kirchdorfer. That night, she and her family went to Dairy Queen to get ice cream. Then they went to a nearby lake. While her father backed into the parking lot, a strange aura came around the car. They don't remember much after that. But Melanie remembers being levitated and then being on a spaceship. Another man named Tom Warner remembers being on the spaceship as well. He even remembers seeing Melanie beside him. Before that, they never even knew each other. That same night, a woman named Jane and her friend Mary were driving home when they saw several bright lights in front of them. Her and a couple of other cars actually had to pull over because the lights were so bright that they couldn't see where to drive. When they got out of their car, they saw a huge object floating over the road in front of them. And many other people all shared several stories from that night as well. So it's quite creepy that many people came forward, all random individuals with no relation to each other, but they all had similar stories. They all experienced this weird UFO encounter.
Alright, kicking things off at number 10, we got the Roswell incident. This takes us back almost 75 years, when the US government would downplay the reports of a flying saucer in the sky. At first, the US government claimed that what people saw was simply a conventional weather balloon, and there was nothing more to it. Of course, many people figured they were lying, and it was just a cover-up for the aliens that they were now holding captive. And then in the 90s, the US government would declassify reports, which would provide Americans and the world the truth about what actually happened in Roswell, New Mexico decades ago. Given the heightened tensions during the Cold War, the US government had actually created surveillance balloons as part of their top-secret project, codenamed Project Mogul. The idea was these balloons would allow the US government to spy on the Soviets without ever being caught or putting any person in harm's way. More specifically, the balloons were equipped with microphones in an effort to pick up sound waves generated by Soviet atomic bomb tests. I'll give it to them. Very advanced tech. But not cool to a lot of the people. Come on now, we trusted you. We thought you had our best interests there, and you lied. On to number 9, we got the New Jersey UFO. Taking us back to 2001, it seems whatever was in the air caught the attention of numerous drivers along the New Jersey Turnpike. On July 14th, 2001, around 12:15 a.m., eyewitnesses saw odd-looking orange and yellow lights forming what appeared to be a V over the Arthur Kill Waterway, which is located between New York and New Jersey. To no surprise, this led to a handful of citizens calling in what they saw with their own eyes, but air traffic controllers denied that any planes or flying objects belonging to the government were responsible. However, a group known as the New York Strange Phenomena Investigators claimed they had a radar which provided data proving the claims of the numerous eyewitnesses. And of said eyewitnesses, one included the local police department's Lieutenant Daniel Tarrant. So it's not like this was a bunch of kids playing pranks. People of all ages and backgrounds saw these things, and to this day, we don't know who or what were responsible. At number 8, San Diego 2019. This footage was obtained by Jeremy Corbell, who has been responsible for filming and exposing a lot of UFO footage. In fact, these were the videos that the Pentagon eventually confirmed as legit, originally coming from the Navy, and would appear to be a huge driving force behind this upswing in UFO interest over the last couple of years. Corbell told local outlets, I quote, "They were swarmed by UFOs. We're talking 9 ships over 2 sets of days in July 2019, just off the coast of San Diego. These are machines of unknown origin swarming our Navy warships, flying with impunity in our restricted airspace off the coast of San Diego. This is a big deal." Another video appeared to show a UFO in the shape of a sphere moving along the ocean before descending into the water. Corbell went on to explain to the local news outlet, I quote, "The people on the USS Omaha, you could hear them in shock. What flies through the air then enters the water. These machines are so advanced they can penetrate water and keep on going. It penetrated that space between air and water without destruction." And given that the Pentagon confirmed the footage was legit and recorded by the Navy, well, I mean, what more evidence could you want? This is like the most we'll get of them being like, yes, that is real. Lucky number 7, Oumuamua. What is it? Well, no one could say for sure. At one point, it was classified as an asteroid, but then upon confirmation, it was behaving more like a comet. It was classified as one. And you better believe it didn't stop there. NASA, as well as other professionals and agencies, would eventually collectively agree this thing is simply an interstellar object. But that's not all. It's the first interstellar object to enter our solar system, at least that we know of, so it's a pretty big deal. Initially discovered on October 19th, 2017 by the Pan-STARRS team, it was given the name Oumuamua, meaning a messenger from afar arriving first. It's about 1,300 feet in length and incredibly skinny, and has a red coloring to it, which is why it was likely initially thought to be an asteroid. And considering that it's so new still, well, there have been a handful of theories or arguments for what this thing may or may not be. As you can imagine, some think it's simply a space rock, while others are certain it's the work of aliens. Oh yeah. We did an entire video on this one not too long ago, so check it out if you guys are interested. Got a little plug there for you guys. A little plug it in, you know, like that Febreze commercial. Plug it in, plug it in. I think it was Febreze. I don't know what it was, but You guys will know what I'm talking about. Maybe not. Number 6, Stephenville UFO. As they say, everything is bigger in Texas, and you'll see why that's funny in 1 second. Coming out of the small town of Stephenville, haha, get it? Anyways, which is known for their dairy farms, well, this is one of the most legitimate UFO sightings ever. Taking us back to January 8th, 2008, dozens of locals saw what they believed was potentially the work of aliens or something completely unexplainable. They all saw the same thing. White lights above Highway 67, initially in a single horizontal arc, as it was reported, and then into vertical parallel lines. A local pilot, Steve Allen, thought the lights, I quote, spanned about a mile long and half a mile wide, and went as fast as 3,000 miles per hour. The craziest thing about this story is that all the locals reported that the object they saw didn't make a sound. However, the pilot went on to explain that the size of the UFO was, I quote, bigger than a Walmart. And we know how overwhelmingly big Walmarts can be, guys. They're not Costco's, but still. Walmarts? Damn. Halfway at number 5, we got the Tic Tac. The date was November 14th, 2004, and this event also took place on the coast of San Diego. Ain't that something? The aliens seem to love the coast, and I don't blame them. It's nice over there. So the story goes that the USS Princeton, which was a part of the USS Nimitz battle group, saw a mysterious aircraft about 100 miles off the coast. For a couple weeks, they were tracking objects that would go as high as 80,000 feet and then drop down to just hover on top of the waters. This led to a couple of FA-18F fighter jets to investigate, which is when they first saw churning waters and then what looked like an oval-shaped shadow below. Then all of a sudden, a white tic-tac shaped object, as it was described, appeared. The object, whatever it was, didn't show any indication of having an engine, windows, or wings, all things that most aircrafts require. And further inspection revealed there was no exhaust, at least when looked at with an infrared monitor. When the two pilots, Black Aces Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate of Strike Fighter Squadron 41 tried to catch up to the UFO, it took off, moving 3 times the speed of sound. It would then appear on radar approximately 60 miles away. Footage of the Tic Tac appearing UFO would eventually be confirmed by the Pentagon as well. And that, my friends, is crazy. Next up at number 4, Harbour, MILLE, Newfoundland. This one is very sketchy because the people of the small town of about 200 definitely saw something in the skies. And the local authorities admitted something happened, but wouldn't expand beyond that. On January 25th, 2010, Darlene Stewart and her neighbors all spotted 3 objects in the sky, which appeared to resemble rockets or missiles of sorts. The crazy thing is, they appeared to rise from the ocean, with smoke or flames shooting out the back end. When asked about it, Sergeant Wayne Edgecombe of the local police department said, I quote, "We confirmed that it was something, it's nothing criminal." After explaining that the Department of National Defense told him some information, he said it was up to them to make that information public. However, months later, the Canadian government and authorities would claim they didn't have an explanation for what was photographed, and although some were certain it was an illusion of sorts, others were sure it was the work of aliens. Let me get a little more excited for you. Others were certain it was the work of aliens, baby. Let's go! I want to meet one. Just one day I want to meet one. Sorry, guys. I'm just like, they excite me. I don't think they would kill us. I don't think they have like laser guns and stuff like that. I just think, you know, it'd be like just very interesting. Now at number 3, the O'Hare International Airport incident. This one was a bit controversial because there was never an official investigation launched after the Federal Aviation Administration deemed the incident was a weather phenomenon. Not sure why they wouldn't just give it a quick look-see-poo, but given that numerous people, both employees and travelers, saw this thing, well, it's interesting to say the least. On November 7th, 2006, a flight from Chicago was about to take off, with its intended destination being North Carolina. Flight 446 was stopped when an employee of United Airlines, who was directing the craft prior to takeoff, noticed an object hover over the gate. 11 other employees working with United Airlines, as well as some witnesses outside the airport, all saw whatever this thing was. A saucer-shaped craft with a dark gray or metallic color. It hovered on the spot for about 5 minutes before flying upward rather quickly. It would go international, but given that the FAA shut it down blaming weather, it seemed that people knew they could only speculate what it may have been. Number 2, the Phoenix Lights. March 13th, 1997, thousands of people claimed to have seen strange, bright lights flying over Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico, with different events described over a few hours. The first claimed that of a V-shaped object the size of an airplane, which confused a lot of locals. Then more reports came in of orange and red lights flying over the valley, initially noticed by a police officer. Arizona's governor at the time, Fief Symington, initially took it as a joke, before seeing the lights himself and telling local news, I quote, "I'm a pilot and I know just about every machine that flies. It was bigger than anything I've ever seen. It remains a great mystery. Other people saw it, responsible people. I don't know why people would ridicule it," even though he ridiculed it at first. Anyways, the lights would eventually be explained as flares which were dropped by military aircraft during a training exercise. However, the V-shaped object, which was noticed by numerous witnesses, still remained a mystery. To this day, it still does. Interesting. At number 1, Go Fast. What a cool name. That's really why I put it number 1, guys. The video, which is referred to as Go Fast, was actually taken near the Florida coast by a US Navy fighter jet. Back in 2015, the jet belonging to the USS Theodore Roosevelt captured a very clear video of something moving at incredibly fast speeds. The FA-18 Super Hornet used the Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared, ATFLIR for short, or ATFLIR, but I like ATFLIR, pod to track this thing. And it worked. Whatever it was they were tracking looked very similar to what pilots saw on the San Diego coast back in 2004. Again, this was a white oval looking craft with no visible windows, wings, or exhaust, and it was about 45 feet in length. To this day, there's been no explanation of what this thing was, if it was even the same object that I mentioned earlier. That being said, the Pentagon did confirm its authenticity, which makes things even crazier. Something that has always stood out to me and many others is that this alien footage, or really any UFO footage, is always distorted. Ain't that something? Much like other sightings of interesting or abnormal things, such as Bigfoot and other majestic monsters, it seems any sightings of aliens or UFOs have always been, well, kind of bad. Grainy, not clear, usually in black or white, and given that a lot of us have mini 4K cameras in our pockets in the form of smartphones, well, it really gets you thinking. What's up with the lack of camera quality here? I mean, we're talking about some of the wealthiest organizations using some really outdated tech, or so it seems. Today on Life's Biggest Questions, we're asking, why does the Pentagon only have distorted UFO footage? Smash that like button and let's get into it. And I think the most obvious answer here, or the most common thoughts regarding the poor quality of UFO footage, would be that they are edited or fake. Over the years, the idea of having evidence in the form of a picture or video has led many to believe there is no way to dispute a claim. However, as we know and have seen, people tend to get creative when making incredible discoveries, if you'd even call them that. Given that we know in the film industry some of the world's very best can make things appear in ways they're not, well, the same could be said for any amateur with a camera. A prime example would be the infamous Bigfoot footage, which was taken back in 1967 and is known as the Patterson-Gimlin footage. Some were certain this was clear footage that Bigfoot was real, while others were under the impression this was simply a man dressed up in a gorilla costume. The footage itself was in color, and again, it was grainy, but we're talking about a camera from 1967. So what does Bigfoot have to do with the Pentagon's UFO footage? Well, the point I'm making is that even though there is video footage, not everyone is going to necessarily believe from the get-go that the footage itself is even real. That's not me questioning whether or not to believe the Pentagon's footage either, more so just proving a point that nowadays, just because something has been recorded, well, it's not necessarily proof of anything at all. On top of that, we know that even when things are recorded, there are plenty of different types of softwares that can either alter or edit video footage. Given that regular people, such as you and I, not that I'm anything remotely close to normal, but that's besides the point. Given that we have access to software such as Premiere Pro and Final Cut, stuff that a lot of the top professionals use to edit some of the best footage out there, I wouldn't be all that surprised if the US government is able to get their hands on some even better software. You know, the type of tech and software that costs tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of bucks, and can do things that we never even thought was possible. And this could be a good or a bad thing. On one angle, we could look at it from the perspective of these guys have the top of the line gear and recording software, so they should be able to take any footage received, regardless of how bad it was when originally recorded, and turn it into video gold. We're talking remastering to the max, going from black and white to 4K. So why is this alien footage black and white and still grainy? Well, that leads to my next point. Again, under the assumption the Pentagon does have top of the line recording technology as well as softwares, it's also possible that the opposite is true. They have very clear, high quality footage of UFOs and potentially even extraterrestrial life, and rather than just show the world the proof, they decide to make it poor quality on purpose. This way they could lead the public to believe they too don't know all that much, when in reality, they're trying to study and understand their findings without having to deal with the public and media breathing down their necks. It's also possible that whatever they find is potentially classified information, and until that information is declassified, they need to keep the general public and the rest of the world in the dark. I've referenced Roswell in a handful of our UFO, Pentagon, and alien videos, and for good reason. It's a prime example of what I'm explaining could be a possibility. Everyone says they saw UFOs, the US government claimed it was just a weather balloon, and then decades later, only after being exposed by a former general, did the US government admit that it wasn't a weather balloon and instead a secret US operation, which they needed to keep confidential at the time. Well, who's to say whatever they found the last 20 years, give or take, also needs to be confidential until they better understand what they're dealing with. Now, I'm not saying that this is a fact, but more so just a possibility of what's happening. As you can imagine, there are a handful of other possibilities or reasons that the UFO footage is always distorted. distorted. Although the previous idea seems a little more of a fun and out there of a theory, the more realistic and likely reasons behind the poor footage would be distance. A lot of the radars or video footage that was recorded by the US government was likely taken from quite a distance. If you pull out your phones and zoom all the way in, you can clearly see the quality of the footage starts to become more grainy. Imagine that on a scale in the hundreds or even thousands. Now that's not to say that the US government isn't capable of taking pictures of things very far away. They've taken photos of things out in space. So the idea of an HD picture right here on Earth, well, that doesn't seem so crazy to me. But again, we need to think about the situation at hand. Those who take photos of things out in space are given the equipment for that specific job. That's what they're expected to do. The Pentagon, on the other hand, at least when it comes to these specific videos, weren't necessarily searching for UFOs at the time. As we know, during a handful of US Navy military drills, UFOs were spotted hovering near or around some ships. Obviously, for security reasons, I'm sure the Navy has recorded footage of what happens during their drills. But as you can imagine, they may not be using the top-of-the-line cameras to record what is happening during a military drill, because that's not the point of the drill in the first place. You see what I'm getting at? It's possible that the Navy was going about their business and something unusual happened. Realizing they couldn't set up their top-of-the-line cameras and software to record 4K or 8K HD or whatever they use footage of whatever it was they were dealing with, they decided instead to just record it the best they could in the moment using whatever was readily available. Thus, we were presented with some poor quality, grainy black and white footage, which is very tough to make out. Now, to make matters worse, there was clearly a far distance when this was recorded, so they likely had to zoom in using technology that probably isn't made for getting those close-ups. As you can see, this answer of the Navy just wasn't readily equipped because they weren't expecting to be followed by UFOs isn't as exciting as the Navy purposely made their footage look shoddy so they could keep us in the dark about what's really going on while they try to understand it. But it's also a possibility. Now, to wrap things up, the UFO report that was presented to Congress by the Pentagon made note that of the 144 sightings, only one was determined to be a deflating balloon. And as far as I'm concerned, we haven't seen footage of 144 sightings, only like 3 or 4, no? There were the 2 from the Navy in 2004 and 2015 in which they had 2 separate incidents in the latter, and another from San Diego in 2019. But what about all the other footage? It's quite possible they do have clear-cut footage and have only shared some of the more grainy, low-quality stuff with the general public. I mean, even the original videos that we saw, which led to this report, were leaked. So it's quite possible those who are a part of the UF task force are in possession of some top-notch quality videos, and only a select few not only have access, but the knowledge that they exist. All in all, the point I'm making is maybe these poor quality videos are all a part of a game that the government is playing, so we stop looking into what else they have or know while they continue doing some research. As I've been saying, guys, only time will tell. I'm not saying you can't trust what you hear or read, but take everything with a grain of salt. Do your own research, and overall, remember that we're talking about aliens here, guys. Now, I know we were all eagerly awaiting for that UFO report to be submitted to Congress, and the Pentagon made good on their deal submitting said report while simultaneously leaving people even more confused than they were before. If these things aren't the work of aliens and they can't prove it's the work of foreign adversaries, then what are these things? Given that UFO stands for Unidentified Flying Object, it seems, technically speaking, once determined who or what we were dealing with, well, they would no longer be classified as a UFO. So technically speaking, one couldn't really create a UFO, given that if said person created it, well, it wouldn't necessarily be unidentifiable, at least to the original creator. Instead, maybe the term flying saucer or aircraft would be more appropriate. Or maybe not. Today in LBQ, we're asking, what if the Pentagon created a UFO? Smash that like button, and let's get into it. Because you know, we're talking about 2 of my favorite things. We're talking science, and we're talking aliens, baby! Now, it seems there are actually a few ways to go about this question. Naturally, any sort of UFO would also be some sort of aircraft, as the term UFO literally includes flying object in the abbreviation. So I'll be using the terms UFO or aircraft quite interchangeably, maybe even toss in a few rockets and airplanes, who knows? One way of looking at things would be if the Pentagon was able to capture a UFO, whatever that may be, and backwards engineer it, or reverse engineer it, to fully understand how it's capable of doing whatever it is it can do. As we know, the Pentagon's report made note of nearly 150 unidentified aerial phenomena, which is just the government's way of saying UFO. The total was 144, captured over the last 20 years, give or take, with only one of them being identified as a deflating balloon. The other 143? No clue. But as we know, some of the images or videos captured these UFOs moving in ways that we thought were impossible, either at speeds which were never seen before, cutting in different angles, directions, and even shooting down into the water. Clearly there are a few different types of UFOs, which are capable of doing different things, which means depending which UFO the Pentagon captured and then reversed engineered or took apart and studied, only to remake a version of their own, is also important to note. Was it the UFO that was able to stay in the air for nearly 12 hours without having to refuel, or was it the one that moved in ways ways we didn't think machines of that size and weight were capable of doing. Maybe they captured a UFO that has the ability to shoot down below waters, and somehow has enough power to come back up through the depths of the ocean and maintain flight high up in the air. Now, given that regardless of which UFO captured and recreated would give more or less similar answers, I'm not going to break down what would happen if they found each one. The simplest answer is they would take apart their findings only to put it back together in hopes of it working the exact same way. This would allow engineers, scientists, and whoever else would build the UFOs to create replicas of sorts, assuming again the UFOs are created using materials that we have available to us here on Earth. This leads to another very interesting idea, that maybe this is the work of an extraterrestrial species, which we'll touch on more later. Assuming these things were man-made by someone, somewhere, if the Pentagon found ways to create more, it would allow them to continue to have an incredibly powerful and well-equipped military. However, just because the Pentagon would be capable of creating UFOs doesn't necessarily mean they would outright admit to that. In fact, it's quite possible the UFOs tracked by the government are actually not UFOs at all. Well, to some degree. Of course, to us, the general public, the media, and the majority of the world who truly have no idea what these things actually are, yes, they are UFOs. But hypothetically speaking, what if the US government, for example, are actually responsible for these UFOs and are just playing into this idea that they actually have no idea what they are either? Now, this idea that the government would lie to the general public for the purpose of national security seems absolutely crazy. And then you open a history book and understand that over the years, governments in general have done things in the past while either outright lying to their citizens or just not telling the whole truth. Specifically using the US government, we could look at the Roswell incident, in which the US government told everyone what they found was a weather balloon, only to admit the truth decades later. Turns out this was a top secret government operation codenamed Project Mogul, which at the time was to be kept classified. Thus, the Roswell UFO turned weather balloon incident came to be until it was no longer true. There was also MK Ultra, which was the codename used for a top secret CIA project in which unsuspecting soldiers would be dosed with hallucinogenic drugs or potentially be a part of electroshock therapy. Although some of those being tested knew exactly what they had signed up for, others weren't so lucky, even when the hallucinogens started to take effect. And this lasted nearly 20 years, from about 1953 to 1973, until it was fully declassified in 1975, which is when all hell broke loose, as you can imagine. So going back to the US government actually knowing and controlling these UFOs, but acting as if they have no idea what they are, assuming they're a part of a highly classified project, well, that doesn't seem so far-fetched in my eyes. Although some believe those in the government are always more informed than the general public, you'd be surprised that a lot of the government is still considered the general public, thus they don't know a whole lot more than we do. Much like us, they too get their news from media outlets, unless of course they're in a very high important position and are told about classified projects and details. Even the president may not be let in on certain projects for the safety of themselves and national security, which means it is quite possible that the UFOs spotted over the last 20 years or so do belong to the US government, and only a handful of people, maybe 5, maybe 10, know about it. I say this because after doing a video on the Pentagon's secret army, where very few people even know who's undercover or who's using a false identity, it seems the government operates as a bunch of smaller entities working together as one. Now that's obvious, as even the US government can be broken down into 3 smaller groups, if you will: legislative, which is Congress; executive, which is the president; and judicial, which is the federal courts. But I'm more so pointing out the idea of, for example, among the UFO team that the US government employs, you likely have those tracking UFOs with radars and such, those studying any UFO findings such as debris or spaceships, and then those trying to reverse engineer them. Who's to say those trying to reverse engineer the UFOs were able to do so, but it's so top secret they can't tell their friends who work in the radar UFO section or the team who researches the debris found. Again, this could be for national security reasons, the same way the government lied about the Roswell incident. At the time, they felt it was necessary and more important to keep their citizens safe than to tell them the truth. So going back to my original point, it is in fact possible that the US government knows exactly what these UFOs are and are pretending it's something they've never seen before in order to protect their own work. Remember how before there was this fear that a foreign adversary such as Russia or China could be responsible for these aircrafts, which would cement how much more advanced their technologies are compared to ours? Well, let's flip the script. I'm sure China and Russia thought maybe this is the work of the US government, and if they're capable of creating these crafts, they're further ahead from a technological standpoint than originally thought. And if this is the case, why would the US government admit to other foreign governments, who they feel could be a threat to national security, that they are in fact the ones responsible for creating this new type of machinery never seen before? Wouldn't the US government have more of an advantage acting as if they too have no idea what they're dealing with, when in reality they were the ones responsible all along? They did it with Roswell, who's to say it doesn't happen again? I'm just saying, guys. Now to wrap up, let's go down the rabbit hole with a wacky idea that the US government is actually working with aliens to perfect new technologies. I told you guys we were going down the rabbit hole, so don't give me that look. And although sometimes I randomly pull things out of the rectum library, this time around it seems we got some others who actually do believe the US government, as well as other government agencies, potentially alien agencies, are working all together. And they have a secret meeting base on Mars. I wish I was joking with you guys. But the truth is, this all sounds crazy until it turns out to be true. And then we were the ones that were crazy all along. Open your eyes, dude, the aliens are here already, bro. But on a more serious note, which very few people took seriously, a former Israeli space security chief outright said that former President Donald Trump knew about aliens and even referred to what he called, I quote, the Galactic Federation. Hayam Eshed, who at one point was the head of Israel's Defense Ministry's Space Directorate, spoke of an underground base in the depths of Mars, as he put it, where aliens and the US government, being represented by US astronauts, were working out a deal. I know, wild stuff. He even went as far as saying that Trump knew and almost revealed the information to the public, but was asked not to, fearing mass hysteria. To no surprise, this story didn't gain a ton of traction, and most wrote it off as crazy. When asked about if NASA had seen signs of intelligent life, a spokesperson said in a statement, I quote, "Although we have yet to find signs of extraterrestrial life, NASA is exploring the solar system and beyond to help us answer fundamental questions, including whether we are alone in the universe." And that's all wonderful, but again, what if, as crazy as this sounds, there is some truth to this? And the UFOs are the work of aliens trying to understand and explore our planet the way we're trying to understand and explore Mars. What if a deal was made with the US government where these aliens are being welcomed into the United States and shown around while the US government is expecting the same from aliens on Mars? As in, two separate species governments working together to teach each other things. You know? Bit of a far-fetched idea, but I wanted to end things on a fun note.